3.
Okay, so hello everybody. I don't know where you all are, probably all over. It's nice to meet you. I understand that some of you are going to, if not all of you, I don't know. You're going to Macedonia. So I have some stories to tell you. They're not exactly about what you're going to see now, because I was there, I lived there, I worked there for 50 years ago. But I did a book on the subject. So I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to tell you a story about the 6 months I spent a long time ago in faraway Macedonia in 1971. I'm going to show you and talk about a Macedonia that may have at least partially or mostly vanished. What I depicted in my photographs was a peasant and small town, agriculturally oriented and centered place, a place where peasants planted, harvested, and winnowed by hand. It sounds perhaps romantic to some of us, but it was a very hard life, and it was a very hard land. The peasants were aware of the beauty of the land. They were enthralled by it, but their life was extraordinarily hard. Their days were long and difficult. They welcomed guests and strangers, and they were happy to share everything they had with me, a stranger. I'm sure that you can still see elements of that there, but Macedonia, like the rest of the world, has moved on and undergone tremendous change. I'm going to tell you about a book that took me 50 years to finish. My 7th published book, which is called A Mirror in Macedonia. But first, I would like you to understand what drew me there. How did I get there? So I'm going to play some music in a couple minutes of an interview from a podcast that was prepared by Professor Elena Yakimovska of the University of Kirill and Methodius. I don't see her name here. She might have joined us, but she had some kind of family event. She's an ethnographer, an anthropologist from Skopje, which is the capital of Macedonia. Ginat will send a link, I guess, at the end, or show a link at the end. She'll show you where you could see the whole interview if you're interested, and get more information about the book. So now I'm going to start by showing you a photograph. Whoops. To start by showing you a photograph that, for me, sort of epitomizes the can you see that? I can't see. You see a photograph? We're looking at a panorama.
Yes, we see it.
Okay.
Yeah, we see it very well.
Okay, we're looking at a panoramic sort of photograph of a scene from an area in the south of Macedonia near Prilep. There was a monastery there. I climbed up on the hill and I saw this rugged landscape. This sort of epitomizes for me Macedonia. You can see that there are people that are moving their cattle, their goats across the land. The land is pretty barren, very rocky, and I'd say that's not a bad indication of what a lot of the landscape looks like. Sometimes it's very pretty. Anybody who's going there, I gather that you're spending time in Ohrid, it's going to be a very beautiful, very attractive place. But there is another side. So right now, I'm going to show you a little bit from this video so that you can hear a little bit about what animated me and what made the place so attractive to me in the first place.
We're not hearing music.
We're not. Oops.
There we go.
You got it?
Ooh, now it's too loud.
Too loud. Does that help?
Yeah, it's pretty loud. I'll turn it down.
Through folk music. I always liked folk music. Folk music always spoke to me. That's how I came to Israel too. It's the same thing. I loved the music. It spoke to me. It tells a story, and it gives the spirit of a people. I think in a way that no other music can. It's not contrived. It comes from the people, and it was that music that drew me to the Balkans in general, and to Macedonia in particular. There was something about the Macedonian music that was so strong and vital that I felt there had to be something deep and beautiful there to see. And I go by my feelings.
Ова е Нил Фолберг, денес 71 годишен американски фотограф кој живее во Израел. На неговите прекрасни фотографии од Македонија од 1971 неудамна налета случајно на интернет. Првата помисла беше, како е можел никој тука да не ги видел цели 50 години? Зошто досега немало изложба, студија, каква и да е промоција на постоењето на една ваква?
Okay, sorry. So, can you see me now? I'm talking. So this is what drew me to Macedonia, was the folk music. I had a strong background was interested in folk culture, and I was, from a young age, I was a folk dancer, and I heard this Macedonian music, and I knew that it came from a rugged land with a vibrant folk culture, from people that lived in a hard land. It was a place that I needed to photograph. So at the time, I was a student at the University of California, Berkeley, during the late 1960s, when the university opened up a possibility of individual undergraduate interdisciplinary studies. I decided to apply for an undergraduate grant and create a new area of study that combined anthropology, photography, language. And my goal was to produce a study of Vardar, Macedonia. So in order to enable that, I had faculty sponsors, one of whom was an American photographer by the name of William Garnett that I studied with. And the other one was my informal but longtime mentor, Ansel Adams, if you've heard of him, and with whom I also studied. So my proposal was approved. I had an individual curriculum, and I got a grant, and I approached the Yugoslav government through the consulate in San Francisco. I have to give you a little bit of background about Yugoslavia then, because doesn't exist anymore. Yugoslavia was a state that was founded after the war. The leader was a man by the name of Josip Broz Tito. He was a communist and very allied in the beginning with Stalin. And later he kind of liberalized communism to a degree where Yugoslavia was thought of to be as one of the most liberal communist countries of all. That didn't mean that it was entirely free, but it meant that it was a fairly comfortable place to be and to live. And it included 6 areas, 6 states that were part of the Socialist Federated Republic of Yugoslavia. one of which was the Socialist Republic of Macedonia. So that's the atmosphere that I was working in. It was an unoppressive, fairly liberal communist government where people were not afraid to speak their minds. They spoke with me freely, but they had to be careful. You had to watch yourself. So I didn't give the background either of my studies. I also learned to speak the nominal language of Yugoslavia, Serbo-Croatian. I spoke it fairly well, and I was able to manage quite well. I believed that in order to insert yourself into a people's culture, you had to make the effort to to be familiar with the culture and the language. I didn't believe in going as an outsider with no knowledge. I insisted that I had to be able to have at least some connection with the people there. So I flew to Belgrade and from there to Skopje. And in those days, when you flew into Skopje, they had to clear the runway of sheep. It was a very small airport. I don't know, they maybe had 2 or 3 flights a day, I think. But, and before I could begin working there, I had to present my credentials. I had this beautiful gold stamped letter, huge seal of the University of California on an impressive letterhead signed by the chancellor of the university, introducing me to the Yugoslav government. And I had to present my, as it were, sort of diplomatic academic credentials. So I had to schedule a meeting with the vice president of the Macedonian Republic. So I made my appointment with this gentleman. His name was Petar Boškovski. And when I came into his office, you know, I was told to take a seat, and I took a seat. And I waited, and then without any visible sign that anything had changed, no signal from anywhere, after about 20 minutes, half an hour, I think they were just trying to keep me waiting to show me how important this person was. I was ushered into the office of the vice president of Macedonia, who happened to be in charge of cultural relations with foreign countries. And I walked into this huge room, and there was a huge desk, and behind the huge desk, there was a relatively small man wearing glasses who did not look up. He did not look up. He looked down at his desk and his papers for a minute, maybe 2 minutes. It felt like about an hour, until he finally looked up and said to me in Serbo-Croatian, Comrade Folberg, welcome to Macedonia. You're going to have to learn to speak Macedonian. Take a chair and make yourself comfortable. I looked around. I looked over there. I looked over there. I looked over there. And there was no chair. So I said, there's no chair. He said, well then, comrade, you're going to have to stand, aren't you? Well, there I am, standing, getting more nervous by the minute. And he says, comrade, you know that here in Yugoslavia, we are all comrades. This is a socialist country. And I said, yes, comrade, I know that. And he said, but you can't call me comrade. Do you know why? And by this time, I'm kind of quaking, trying to think, my goodness, what the hell did I get myself into here? And he says, because I am an official of the Communist Party and a government official, and therefore I'm not anybody's comrade. And then he started to laugh and got me a chair and a cup of coffee. It was his idea of a practical joke. That was my introduction to Macedonian bureaucracy and some of the adventures that were awaiting me. I actually had no idea how closely the government would actually watch me. So He helped me arrange a place to stay. He found me a room with a family where I paid $1 a night for a room, and I had a place to stay that was within my budget, and they could keep an eye on me because she happened to be one of the secretaries in his office. So her family. So they had a place where they could keep an eye on me, and I had a place where I could stay and put my stuff. I had 400 rolls of black and white 120 size film. That's a medium format camera. One lens, a tripod, and a light meter. My budget was $3 a day. I had some basic training in anthropology, and I was going to go see everything I could lay my hands on. I don't think I ever used more than 3 rolls of film a day. That was 36 exposures. It wasn't like today where you go out and start snapping here and there. I knew what I was doing. I knew what I was looking for, and I had to be careful with what I did with the materials that I had. I was focused on making images of the people on the land. It was sort of an in-depth study, modeled in some ways on the work of the rather famous American photographer Dorothea Lange, who did photographs during the Depression. I studied her work. I saw her contact sheets. I did research, and I said, this is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for images that are direct, compassionate, devoid of pretension, and stripped down to the minimum necessary to portray the subject. I wrote about these subjects in the book. These images have been beckoning to me for years. They were made in the days when photography was simpler, direct, and more honest. They were made in the days when digital referred to your fingers, which meant staining your fingernails brown in the developer as you watched the image develop under dim red light in the darkroom. I printed these rich selenium toned silver prints on burita coated cotton fiber paper made by a company called AGFA. No one makes such beautiful silver rich paper anymore. Like so many manufacturers of that era, AGFA is long bankrupt. The film that I used, Panatomic X, has not been made since 1987. I no longer develop silver prints and trays of chemicals under red light. The people in the pictures are now 50 years older, if they are still alive. I'm 50 years older. I was 21 years old when I did this project. The country they lived in, Yugoslavia, no longer exists. The prints have aged well, surely better than the people depicted in them. The oxidized silver embedded in the paper's glossy gelatin emulsion has a deep, warm tonality expressed in rich shades of gray and black. Space and time are compressed into 2 dimensions on the surface of this paper. So that's what I was looking at, and that's what I was trying to get to. I was trying to create these images that could somehow survive the test of time. Once in Macedonia, I spent a lot of time dealing with bureaucratic issues. You needed permits for everything. You needed permits to photograph people in the streets, general scenes, churches, and monuments. You needed the government's permission, not a release from the subjects themselves. There were things that were forbidden to photograph. There were bridges, soldiers, dams, army camps, and for all I know, they're still forbidden, so you might be careful. And even pointing a camera in their direction could get you into trouble. I set out on foot and by bus to get every place I could manage. I wanted to see the land and how the ordinary people lived and to record that. I walked around constantly, meeting people, getting invited into their homes, spending a day and night with peasant families in lovely, but often very primitive villages. The peasants worked hard, very hard, but they were resilient and good-humored, even when they complained about the hard land or the government. People took me into their homes, they showed me around, they told me their stories. Everyone had a story they wanted to share with me, and everybody wanted to hear my story as well. I was expected to tell them something as well about myself. Everybody was tagged in some way by their ethnic group. Perhaps this was the downfall of Yugoslavia, but what I saw was a very tolerant society. They were very welcoming of almost everybody. I'll tell you a story. I was walking down the street one day in Skopje. in the old part of town in a place called Big Pazar. Any of you who are going to Skopje on this trip will probably be in Big Pazar. Sitting in the shade of a mosque was an old man, his eyes framed and magnified by the heavy round glasses that he wore. His face was kind and sensitive. As I approached him, he said to me, "When you get to be this old, your life is written on your forehead." He invited me into his shop filled with old umbrellas in need of repair. Was that what he did for a living? Because it didn't rain all summer. He had all sorts of broken umbrellas there. It seemed like a meager source of income, especially in the summer months when I cannot recall that it ever rained. He tried speaking English to me, but he quickly ran out of words. "Son, turn around." On the wall behind me was a death notice headed by a large black cross surrounded by a thick black line. "So much war here," and then an earthquake. Remember, there had been a huge earthquake in the, I can't remember the date, in the late 60s in Skopje that destroyed large portions of the city. "So much war here," and then an earthquake. That is a death notice for my son who died in the quake. First the atom bomb, and then the devil's bomb. These are the times of the devil. I started to set up my camera on a tripod to make a portrait, but he stopped me. "I don't want to be a vehicle for political propaganda," he said. "I trust and believe only in God." I put down my camera and took out my notebook. He said, "Oh," he said, "you're an historian." "Excuse me. The Balkans are a hard place. The Turks, the Bulgarians, the Greeks, the Albanians, the Germans, they've all been here. The fascists and the communists. The fascists thought I was a communist, and the communists thought I was a fascist." Crossed his wrists on the table like that. To indicate handcuffs, clenched his hands and continued. "So I went to prison." I was eager for a personal story like this. This was exactly what I was looking for. So I asked him again if I could make his portrait. He said, "These are the Balkans, my friend, which is a hard place for a man to keep his head. They would see me. They would recognize me." Who were they? I suppose it was the communists for the moment. The broken umbrellas in a shop protected him from storms. It was his cover. He added, "I see that you're honest, so I want to tell you something. You must photograph not with your camera, but with your soul. I'm 70 years old, and even if I live another 60 years, there's nothing more I could possibly teach you. You have life and health to you, son. Photograph with your soul." That's what I went out to do. I thought that was a pretty good advice. By the way, I never did get a photograph of it. And that goes to show that sometimes the best photographs, the most powerful moments, are the things that you engrave in your memory, but you don't actually photograph them. The police stopped me everywhere. I'd be out photographing and I'd hear someone shout, "Zabranyan, Zabranyan," for Belton. They thought every foreigner was a German spy. They assumed I was a spy. They hauled me in for questioning. This happened dozens of times. I became immune to it. It was like a joke for me, but it was a continual disruption. Police seemed to crawl out of drain pipes by the side of the road. They came from nowhere. I would pull out my letters, permission, drop a few names of people in the government, and they let me go, warning me to watch myself. I was also followed by secret agents. I tell all these stories in the book. You know, I went with a friend of mine who was a government official in the Ministry of Information, and to a bookstore. And I walked into this bookstore with him, and then he started looking at books, and I walked out into the square to look around and take photographs. I'd set up my tripod in the middle of the square and wait for something to happen. Part of my approach was I wanted to make myself very visible so that people would come to me naturally and start talking to me. And so I'm standing there in the middle of the square, and some guy comes up to me and flashes a little thing on his lapel and says, "It's forbidden to take pictures here." And I said, "I have permission." And I started to show him the letters. And he said, no, it's forbidden." And I said, "Who are you?" He said, "I'm a secret agent." I said, "Oh, well, if you're a secret agent, there's somebody in the store that you might want to meet." And I dragged him into the bookstore. And I said, Comrade Minister of Information of the Socialist Republic of Macedonia, I'd like to introduce you to a secret agent of the Yugoslav government. And he says, oh, he says, that's interesting. My friend has a good sense of humor. He said, oh, that's so interesting. He said that a secret agent would go introducing himself to every foreigner on the street. He said, we don't approve of that. So I said, show him your credentials. So I reached over and pulled back the lapel of this guy, and a little pin said Apollo 12. So he escaped out into the street, and I continued with my photographs. I'd like to show you some of those photographs, but I had the problem when I wanted to put all this material together into a book. How was I going to do it? Because I had to write about experiences that were 50 years old. I had notebooks. I had a lot of notebooks. I had photographs to remind me, but it wasn't fresh in my mind. And just as I was pondering this difficulty and writing about something that happened 50 years ago, I got an email from my girlfriend of 50 years ago. She says, Neil, I have all of the letters that you wrote to me when you were in Macedonia. And remember, this was in the era when if you wanted to communicate with somebody, you had to write letters. There was no email. There was letters, and you had to write them by hand. So she said, I have 50 letters. There were only actually 31. I have 50 letters that you wrote to me. And if you'd like, I'll send them to you. This woman became a librarian, by the way. She said, I thought one day you might be important. I don't know if I was ever important, but she saved the letters. I have to thank her for that. So now I'm going to show you some of the photographs and tell you about the Macedonia that I saw. Can you see the photograph? I can't see you anymore. I put this in the screen mode. You can
We don't see it yet.
Wait a second. Okay, let me do this again then. Share a screen. I'll do it twice. Now can you see photographs?
Yes, yes, thanks.
Okay, and I'm going to make it bigger. Is it filling up your screen? Okay, so now I'm going to actually show you photographs of what I did, what I saw in Macedonia 50 years ago. And I imagine that some of these things are still there. This book, by the way, that I did is, which has just been published in the last year. It turns out after, and eventually my work was banned in Macedonia. I was banned in Macedonia and by the government after I did the work. And so this book is now being published by with a subsidy from the Ministry of Culture of the Republic of North Macedonia. So I'm glad to see that they found some value in the work, and it's being published in a Macedonian edition. So here is a view of Skopje Pole. It's the plain of Skopje from up above. It's beautiful. It's surrounded by mountains, and you can see the city there. It's a little area with like white haze over it, and in the foreground is a peasant with his donkey and his habitation, his very modest personal home in a little village up in the hills above Skopje. So I was trying to give a view of the land, the overall land, and as I said, the people, and they lived their life in it. So this is a village in southern, southwestern Macedonian, not so far, a little bit north of Ohrid from, called Galichnik. It's up in the hills. One of the most beautiful villages I've ever seen in my life. You can see that the buildings are all made out of stone, local stone. covered with slate roofs. They have hard winters there. And you can see the views of the mountains in the distance. And this is a village, actually a small town. If I'm not getting confused, I think it's Kriva Palanka. You can see in the foreground a little bridge over a gorge, a stream that straddles the town. A nice wooden bridge with some arches. You can see those structures elsewhere in Macedonia, here and there, and elsewhere in Yugoslavia. They're kind of structures that date back to Turkish times. And you can see the houses that are built along the edges of the dirt path that passes through the town, with some peasant woman walking through with a couple animals loaded with whatever she's carrying. This is a town in the south. Then it was called Tito Veles. Now it's called Veles. They disposed of the Tito. And it's along the Vardar River. This is in the summer, very pleasant. These places are so pleasant. The architecture is on a human scale, at least it was. I've seen pictures of this place since. I've never been there since this day, I suppose. But I think they made a new bridge. I'm standing on a bridge, looking down at the river, and there are people going out. You can see the water is not too deep. People are going out to swim and to fish, some of the kids. Macedonia is hot in the summer, and these kids are cooling off in the river. But these places were just pleasant. There's no other word for it. The life was relaxed, not stressful. People took it easy. And this is, for me, an iconic photograph from Macedonia. You can see this rope maker. He actually made handmade rope that he sold in his shop in Prilep, also in the south of Macedonia. And this is the way I worked. I set up my camera on a tripod outside of his shop and just waited. I figured eventually he would see me, would get curious, and would walk out to look and see what's going on. And that's exactly what happened. He's got this, you can see the apron that he's wearing. That's a hand-woven traditional Macedonian apron with this beautiful display and kind of a Turkish, typical kind of Turkish style shop windows with these little panels displaying his rope that he makes and sells. These are two peasants, Ivan Yankovsky and his wife, in a little village called Bulachny. It's adjacent to Skopje. Now it's been incorporated into the Skopje city limits. When I was there, again, I was there in Macedonia in 1971. I went back in 1985 for the New York Times travel magazine, and I went looking for this village and I couldn't find it. I saw road crews working and they said it doesn't exist anymore. And you can see that behind them, look, she's wearing the same kind of apron that the rope maker was wearing. It's the same kind of pattern, traditional peasant clothing. This is handmade clothes. They made everything they owned. And behind them, you can see the house that they built, a very simple peasant home, crude architecture and wooden structure. These places were lovely. They were lovely spaces and they were very comfortable, but they were very primitive. I stayed with them for a couple nights. This was somebody that I met in the marketplace in Bit Pazar, and then I ran into him in this village and they invited me to their home and to stay with them. And you can see their life is very hard, but this is the way they approach the world. They've got smiles on their faces. that's who they were. I saw them many, many times. This wasn't a show. These are handmade pitchforks, 2-tined pitchforks, and a stack of hay. This is telling you a lot about the way they lived. Here's a woman gathering and winnowing wheat in the fields. I remember what she asked me. She knew the answer when she asked the question. It was a rhetorical question. She said, they still work like this in America. Obviously not. And she knew that. But these peasants were working by hand. This is the woman on the cover of my book, Amir in Macedonia. She's in a little village called Mavrovo-Anovi near Ohrid, a very, very beautiful place. Now it looks, I've looked at it online, it looks like some incredible resort place along near the lake. It's just, it was beautiful then. I suppose it's still beautiful. But it was a village where there was a lot of fishing, and you can see she's doing some needlework. That's what she's doing with her hands. And I caught her in the middle of that against the background of her house. And all these, you can see the reeds that they use for making fences stacked up to the, at her side, and her house, her home behind. She was probably about my age. I'm hoping that when I hope planning to go there sometime in May or June after my book is published. I'm expecting some of these people to come out of the woodwork, and I hope that I will be able to find this woman and see her. I'd be curious to meet her. I have a picture of her mother too. Her mother was obviously very much older, but she was quite beautiful as well. This is in Tito Veles, looking down onto the street in the evening on maybe it was a Saturday night. There was a custom called the Corso, where the young people of the town would walk out, the women, the girls would walk with the girls, the boys would walk with the boys in these little groups. You can see that they're all dressed, they're all wearing white clothes and nice shoes, and they're out for this evening promenade on the Corso. They would walk around in a circle and then gather together for meetings in the middle. This is probably a 2 or 3 minute exposure. Some of the people were standing and talking, and some of them were moving, and they would meet, and the girls would talk with the boys in these groups. The social life was rather strictly structured in a traditional kind of way. These are handmade watering cans that I photographed in one of the markets. Beautiful, beautiful objects. I saw these things in Israel when I first came here. They were still making these kinds of things here out of tin. These are more objects made out of tin, a wash basin with a pitcher. Boy on the street. A boy with a ball playing. Look at the intense look that I'm getting. When these people looked into the camera, they didn't have this false convention of smiling. They tried actually to project their personality. Also the kids, there was a direct look that they gave you. This is who I am, and I'm proud of it. This is in a little village in Eastern Macedonia called Gorno Kosovrasti. And I got there, this was one of the last places that I visited during my 6 months there. I got there, I heard the only way to reach this little village was on foot. I heard from a nearby village that there was a wedding there. So I hiked up the hill to this village. Gorno means that it's higher than the other place. There was a lower Kosovrasti and a higher Kosovrasti. And I hiked up to the higher Kosovrasti and found that it was not a wedding, but a circumcision ceremony. It was a Muslim population. And this boy was about to be circumcised at the age of 3. So here he is in the photograph. They're holding a towel in front of him where they're bringing gifts of money. Those are dinarim, the dinari, the currency of Yugoslavia. He's getting gifts, and he's behind him are his sisters and his mother. He's about to leave the world of women and mothers and become a man in his own little way. So he looks apprehensive, as he might well be. This is, I was able to get into all sorts of places. People were really hospitable, and I was open to all these experiences. Here is in a mosque right now in Tetovo, a town in Macedonia, a mosque in Tetovo with a large Muslim population. I went up into the balcony and photographed the men praying, prostrated in prayer. And you know, part of mourning in Macedonia was a public ceremony. You wanted to show how bereaved you were, and there are professional, what's the word for it? When you, yilalot in Hebrew, you know, this kind of shrieking sound that women make at these events, and sometimes happy, sometimes sad. So they were, I followed the whole funeral procession and came to the cemetery following the funeral procession and started to photograph. Nobody minded that I was photographing this very private, very sad family event. In fact, they wanted me there. They were pleased to have me there because it was a public symbol of their mourning. So you can see that the man who's passed away, laying in the casket, covered with gifts that he's going to take with him to the grave. All sorts of their, you know, these little biscuit cookies and handkerchiefs. Look, that's what the woman's holding in her hands, are these handkerchiefs. They put these things into the grave to take with him. I'm not sure what that means. I have no idea what they thought. You can see that there's a folded shirt down in the lower right-hand corner. These are maybe, I don't know. I don't know. When I get to Macedonia and I have a chance to speak with Professor Elena Yakimovska, maybe she'll tell me more about this, about these funeral customs. The boy is looking so into his father's grave. It's obviously his father. And the women are all wearing black for mourning. So it was a hard life. And what I would say is that death was always part of life there. It was always in the air. It somehow never departed. It was part of the life cycle. People didn't hide it. They didn't try to put it behind the screen. They lived their lives with a lot of gusto, and they knew that death was part of life, and it was kind of life is a cycle. Well, I think in Jewish culture, we're very much aware of that too. But this was part of this traditional culture. And finally, I think I'm going to show you one more photograph that's also dealing with the theme of death and the way that it was dealt with in Macedonian culture. This man is a coffin maker that I met in Prilep. He's standing beside one of his creations and smiling, laughing at death. So that's a little group of photographs from this book, Amir in Macedonia. that covers both life cycle and place, people on the land. And finally, there's one more photograph. That's me in 1971, a photograph made with my camera by a photographer that I met in, and now I'm thinking where I met him. All of a sudden the name escapes me. So he took me to his home and told me his story. And I actually recorded an interview with him. That interview, it was interesting. I recorded that interview in Serbo-Croatian. And I really forgot the language. I don't understand it anymore. So I couldn't understand it so well. But I sent a recording of it to Professor Jakimovska. And she aired the interview with a story about this relatively forgotten photographer. So I actually made some kind of modest contribution to ethnography and anthropology in Macedonia. So I'm going to conclude. I wrote in this book about, let's stop the share here so you can see me now. Now you can see me again, I hope. So I wrote in this book that one of the curators of photography at that time at the Museum of Modern Art, John Sarkovsky, wrote that some photographers are mirrors and some photographers are windows. The people that are mirrors are photographing basically their own perception of the world. In a way, they're photographing themselves, their own personality and their take on the world. And there were photographers that were windows, who saw themselves as a window onto the world, and that's what they were photographing. So I saw myself as a window. But it turns out, if you've ever looked into a window, as I'm sure you have, that sometimes windows are mirrors. In fact, most of the time they're mirrors. You can see your reflection. So I had a surprise when I finished all of this project. I looked through the window of my own photographs back to Macedonia in 1971. There I see the rope maker squinting in the bright sunlight outside his shop, where handcrafted ropes are framed in the wooden windows. I see the coffin maker mocking death. I see villages and towns, gypsies, peasants, and small shopkeepers, men and women in their fields, their homes, families celebrating weddings and deaths, children in school reciting poetry. Where are all these anonymous people that I met, each of whom had a story? Where are they today? They're all here in these images. But here's the surprise. Looking back through these windows, I find a mirror reflecting myself, a 21-year-old student from Berkeley. I watch myself as I set up a tripod and camera in a public square where people either flow around me or become engaged, attracted or repelled by my camera. I take notes, recording every image, date, and place. In the evening, I write long letters to my girlfriend. I choose my subjects, enticing some, deterring others. I see that I'm not quite the window that I aspired to be. My very presence changes the scene. Some swirl around me in my camera. Some are fearful of being photographed. Certain photographs are never made. And the irony is that these will be the most important memories, virtual images for which one does not need a camera. These affect me profoundly. Secret agents follow me, but I don't see them. The old man fixing broken umbrellas was right about this also. They are watching me. They will recognize me. They will give me no peace. I observe myself in the mirror of time. Well, that's all I have to say right now, and I'm open to questions if anybody wants to ask.
Everybody could unmute and ask this way. It's easier than on the chat. Anybody? Ginat's not here, I apologize. Are you still in Israel?
Yeah, I'm still in Israel. Yeah. I've lived in Israel since 1976.
So close to 1971 when you were there.
Precisely.
because I was thinking a lot of the scenes, I don't know if you see old pictures of Jerusalem, if you've seen, they're very similar. They feel similar.
Well, you know, both these areas were under Turkish rule. So there's similarities in architecture and culture. The Turks had a pretty strong cultural influence, and also when I came here, one of the most common sights that I saw in Macedonia was tobacco drying on people's porches. I haven't got I didn't show you the pictures just now, but you can see them in the book. I remember I came here and we drove up to Tzfat, up to Safed, on this old windy road that comes up, which I passed, but was there the last week or so. And I remember that there was a big old house there, and there was tobacco drying on the porch of this big, you know, hanging from the rafters, big leaves of tobacco drying there. And they were growing tobacco in the fields. Now they're growing grapes in vineyards in the same field. There's no more tobacco growing here. But there were lots of similarities. It was culturally similar. It was part of the same cultural zone by virtue of the fact that it was dominated and ruled by the Turks for hundreds of years. So yes, there's a lot of.
Is your book available in Israel?
The book is available in Israel. It's available from my gallery. I cannot disappear. Let's see if I can find the information to send you. I'll post it. Let's see, where is it? I have it here somewhere. Well, I'll show you I'm on a NASA website, but I'll go to visiongallery.com. Under books. Those are some of my available books. Here's a mirror in Macedonia. And you can go to there. If you're living abroad, this is the place to.
I'm sorry, where are you showing this? I didn't see.
Oh, I'm not, I'm sorry.
Oh.
I forgot to share it. Sorry, I'll go backwards again. I'll share the screen. Let me go. Okay. Now you can see it. It's at visiongallery.com. I'll go back to the homepage so you can see what it looks like. And you can see the address, visiongallery.com. Under books, here's my book, A Mirror in Macedonia. If you're living abroad, this is the place to order it from if you'd like to have a copy. Click on the thing, add to cart. And if you're living in Israel, the way to get it is to either come into the gallery, and if you don't want to pay for it in dollars, which is the only thing available on my website.
Where's your gallery in Israel?
Central Jerusalem, Kikar Chatulot in Jerusalem, in the center, Nachalat Shiva. It's if you'd like to come in, I'd like to see you, and you can buy the book there. And if you're abroad, like
I'm happy to go in and pick up books for anybody who would like.
Who just spoke? Who just?
Sorry.
Identify yourself. Who just said they would buy? What?
Ruth.
Ruth.
So are there any other questions? It looks like I managed to stick to the time schedule. I'm impressed.
That was a wonderful presentation. It was really, really special. Thank you for sharing all
it
this.
doesn't exactly prepare you for your trip in terms of if among you there are those people going to Macedonia, because it's Macedonia 50 years ago, but it does give you some background. And
but what was your background? Why were you so interested in the area, in the Balkans?
In the beginning, were you there for the beginning?
No.
Okay. Right. So I played some folk music. I was drawn there by the folk culture.
No, I'm saying before that, before the folk music and the culture and the rest. Was it linguistic or was it,
Look,
something?
I was a photographer. I was interested in photographing something.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to do a documentary study that was a complete study of a land and a people and a culture. Mm-hmm. But I was drawn to this particular place by the folk culture.
Okay, and this was through Berkeley, through California, Berkeley,
right? University,
and you chose Cal Berkeley specifically for that reason, then?
No, I started out at Cal Berkeley to do something else. I was going to study medicine, and I was interested in biological research. And at some point, I decided this isn't what I'm going to do, but I got into this instead.
And really, it's a window into the soul of Macedonia.
That's a nice way of putting it. I hope so.
And you start out in medicine, and then you say, well, there's something a little bit more profound. Dr. Sweet from UCSF, she said something very similar to what you described. She started out proposing to become a Jungian psychiatrist, and then she decided instead to become an to practice internal medicine.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was an unusual transition at Berkeley because Berkeley wasn't a place where you studied art. You could study art history, but you couldn't study art. But I made it work for me, and the academic side of the university was a tremendous contribution.
That's a big accomplishment.
And in the end, they subsidized the project. I can't complain. I got a lot from the university. So anything else? I guess we have 2 minutes left or something. I don't know. Okay.
This is a macro group, and so it would be really pertinent for you to just say 2 words about the food in Macedonia while you were there.
Look, I was out in the fields with the peasants. They had a kind of buffalo there that they raised, and they would milk the buffalo and make this delicious, delicious fresh milk. It was something that I've never had since. It was sweet. It was incredible. They could make a pudding out of it, but you could, it was very thick. It was a creamy thing. They would serve it to you. Like, I haven't thought about this in so long. And it was incredible. They made their own wheat. They made their own bread. There's nothing like it. I think that people sometimes are a little bit nostalgic for it, and even in Macedonia, despite the fact that everybody was eager to leave those villages and that kind of hard peasant life. But maybe you'll be lucky. Maybe you can find some of those people that are still milking those buffalo and making these wonderful dishes. That would be a treat. Look, Kinat, tell me if you find it, okay?
And did they serve it to you in some sort of pottery, a crock, or a wooden bowl?